inside his book. Let's try and read through the definition. Mediates between the domain and the data mapping layer using a collection-like interface. Alright, so repository mostly talk about a collection, and it is a mapping pattern. I don't know if you guys have gotten an opportunity of looking at this catalog. The repository pattern is a data mapping category pattern. So if I have to read through this list, notice that there's a domain logic, there are data source pattern, there are object relational behavior patterns, structural pattern, and object relational mapping patterns. And then mapping pattern is a repository pattern. And repository is an in-memory collection of the data. Alright, with that, okay, this document doesn't mention anything about it, but then when we have data as a collection, let me put this question differently. So there are 4 operations that we do with data, like CRUD, create, read, update, delete, or CRUD operations. Alright, repository pattern does not have exactly one of these operations. Alright, and which one is that? And then why is it that way? Why would repository not have that functionality inside it? I'll give away the answer. It is the update function. A repository should not have an update function inside it. Why?
It can be achieved using create and delete.
Update can be achieved using create delete. It can be, but then there's no need for that. We don't have to go that route. It is the justification is something else. But then yeah, I like the thought. Why do we not have update?
So maybe, I'm not sure, but when you work on that repository layer, if you want to update a particular single property, there is a probability that you are actually updating other fields. Maybe, I'm not sure.
Nope. Okay, let's go back to the definition.
Maybe, yeah, it's that there's a new state and it's a new object because you're moving ahead in time.
All right. So I see some touch of functional programming here, but nope. That is not the reason that I know of. See, sure. A repository is an in-memory collection. All right. Now, there are 2 types of data types in .NET, right? The one is value type, the other is a reference type.
Right? Reference.
Exactly. So a collection is probably an enumerable or a list or a collection itself. When we say to the repository, hey repository, get me a student at ID number 1, repository is giving you a reference, right? And because it is an in-memory collection, all you have to do is just update that student. That's it. And then the data is already updated because the repository is already storing a reference of that variable, right? And that's why a repository does not need an update function, because you don't have to put that back to the same spot in the same collection. It is just an in-memory collection already. It gave you a reference, you updated that reference, and then it is already updated inside the repository as well. And that's why your repository pattern should not have an update function. Just a quick tip there. Alright, but how do we persist? And what is the problem if we persist the data inside the repository to a database? What design pattern, what solid principle would we be violating if we have an update function or a persist function inside repository?
Can you come again?
Alright, so repository is an in-memory collection. But then how do we persist then? If it is an in-memory thing, how do we persist and save it to a SQL Server database? Does this make sense?
We can use ORM tools like Entity Framework to do that task for us.
Okay, if we are using Entity Framework, we are again back to the same problem with which we started. What was the problem with which we started?
So
That
probably
we are,
SRP.
okay, so it is violating SRP. So how do we fix it? All right, just to answer the question, just to answer or talk about the question, the answer from the previous discussion, using entity framework is a problem. All right, not many people would appreciate it, but then having knowing about a framework at the code level is a terrible thing. And if I have to give you an example, let me ask you two questions. All right, you wanted to buy a car, okay? You went to the Maruti showroom, and then you said, hey, give me Maruti Swift, probably. Or would you say that, hey, give me a car with MRF tires in it? What do you think that you would be doing in a car showroom? Would you go ask for Maruti Swift, or would you say that, hey, give me a Maruti Swift with an MRF car, MRF tires?
First one.
Definitely the first one, right? Hey, give me Maruti Swift, because you don't care what tires it has, because you can replace those things and they are not the core functionality. All right, as you are developing enterprise grade applications, all right, entity framework is a detail, SQL Server is a detail, MySQL is a detail, in fact Azure itself is a detail. All right, when you are developing application, you should be able to cut down all of those. And then the trick that I use is that if I hear a proper noun, I get a feeling that they are running into tight coupling, or they have locked themselves up with a technology. All right, all I want to hear during all of my discussion is common nouns. Yeah, I said that right. I want to hear only common nouns. Right? I want to hear that we want persistence. I don't want to hear that we want databases, even databases. All right, forget about SQL Server. I don't want to hear that I am going to use Redis cache. All right, I specifically want to hear that it would be nice to have some caching mechanism. That's it. I don't like to hear framework name inside my application. I like them tucked behind some design pattern. And then for identifying that design pattern, we went ahead and started talking about repository. All right, we are getting rid of entity framework through repository. It is not the other way around, that we'll use entity framework so that repository can persist data to database. Does that discussion sound logical to you? I'm so sorry, I didn't catch your name some time back when you were saying, but does this make sense?
Yes.
All right, so we are using design patterns to get rid of the proper nouns from our application, and we are depending more on the common nouns. All right, so how do you persist the data using repository? And then somebody said that if we persist data using repository, we are violating single responsibility, and he's absolutely right.
Sorry, can I ask a question?
Yes, sir, go ahead. Sorry.
Based on the discussion we had so far. So what you are trying to say is we should have an architecture, and we should have layers or tiers which should be depend on abstractions as much as possible rather than concretions?
Yes, sir, definitely. I'm exactly saying that.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. All right, so somebody some time back said that if we try to persist data using repository, we are violating single responsibility principle, and he is right. The question is why, and what do we do about it then?
The why is clear, right?
I'm so sorry, I'm hearing two people. Yeah, Amit, you go ahead.
We can work on interface and have the persistent methods been defined in interface, and whichever entities which you want, we can implement those interface and have the same functionality for that thing.
There is already a design pattern which is doing that work for us.
Okay.
Somebody else was also saying while Amit was talking. I'm sorry, I picked him.
It's me, Rajat.
Hey, Rajat. Yeah,
I was just saying that the why is kind of evident, right? I mean, it's breaking the single responsibility principle because a repository cannot be doing two things, right? It's a repository. You're just like getting data from it.
Correct.
You cannot be updating. So something else is doing the updating. So that's where even I'm a little stumped by your question. How do you do that? So I can imagine that we have to build another kind of maybe a queue system or some bus system.
Right.
I don't know.
So one of the things about these design patterns. Yes, sir.
Sorry
Somebody's
to
saying
interrupt.
something. Sure.
So maybe a chain of responsibility might help us in that thing.
A chain of responsibility. I
Because
think chain of go ahead.
Because we will be forwarding our saving request towards different entity altogether for saving that.
So I see that there is some logic to this, that it is the same data that is getting passed, processed at one level, and then it is given to the next person for handling or doing the work that they want to do with this thing. I don't know how it would fit in.
I mean, you'll have to envelope it with some kind of a transaction handling mechanism, you know. So that's where I'm having a problem, that how do you break it up into two different objects, you know. That's my problem here.
Sure. I'll just give away the answer.
Unit of work.
Unit of work. Somebody, Amit, was it you? Unit of work?
Yeah, so is it unit of work where you need to persist the things?
Yes. See, the problem repository is only helpful when there is a single collection. So if students, you want to do some activity on students, you use repository. But if students are supposed to be enrolled to a particular course, what do you do about it? You have to have another repository that is interacting with courses, correct? So now you have two repositories. When a student says that, hey, I want to enroll for this particular course and I also want to change my name, somebody else as a wrapper of these two repositories should know that these two entities, they are very closely related and they are done making changes. So somebody is going to tell them that, hey, this change operation is done and I should just go ahead and save those changes. Or probably while I was saving these changes, something went terribly wrong and I should just roll back. And this is where unit of work starts to make sense. And I think Amit, you were right on spot when you said that it is a chain of responsibility. But then chain of responsibility with only one intention, that at this level it is going to persist that data. Alright, so chain of responsibility with limited functionality. Alright, so the point that I was trying to make was we will require another design pattern. One of the things about these design patterns is that they do not sit by themselves loosely in the air. They are generally bringing their close relatives, close cousins together, and then together they get some job done. So repository is always accompanied by the unit of work design pattern. All right, so unit of work. Yes, sir.
I have one question.
Sure.
Just trying to understand. So when we say SRP, you're talking about grouping together things, right? And and when we say repository pattern is violating an SRP, that's something looks to me a contradict. I just want to understand how it is violating exactly an SRP.
Because the responsibility that we gave to a repository was an in-memory collection, right? If you read through the definition of repository from Martin Fowler's books and articles, you would eventually stop at this particular line, that it is using a collection-like interface. Alright, all it has to do is just be a collection. Now imagine that the collection object or the list object that you're declaring list of student, alright, list of student is also giving you an option of persisting that data to a database, right? A list should not do that. A list should just do list. You can add, you can access, you can delete, you can remove, you can modify the list, but then that's about it. Persisting that data to a persistent storage like a database, alright, is not something that a list would do.
Okay, so there should be a separate entity that